let's start from the very beginning. What led you to play drums? I mean, what were your inspirations as a drummer?
That's a good opening question. Okay, what happened was that as a child I used to watch various television programs, and I would always be attracted to the drummer. I thought that it was really cool to be sitting there and surrounded with all this hardware and cymbals and etc. etc. So long before there was the social media, there used to be a thing called jumble sales. Now, jumble sales is where people would throw out all their unwanted stuff, and that person that was collecting for the jumble sale would in turn sell it, and the profit would go to a charity or whatever. And somebody threw out a pair of military drumsticks, and I immediately kept those back and proceeded to start hitting the living daylights out of my parents' furniture. And so that they kept their furniture, at the age of 9, they bought me a drum kit.
So then after a couple of bands, you ended up playing with Maiden, right? So what are your memories of that audition when you went to audition for Maiden?
Well, my main memories is actually sitting in a corridor with quite a few drummers, and just slowly working their way. You know, it was almost like being sort of led to the gallows. It was, of course, they weren't famous by then, and it was all very much in the infancy of the band, and it was work in progress. But I don't actually remember that much of the actual audition of sitting there and playing. But I just remember this long corridor in the rehearsal room and so many people.
So you didn't recognize anyone from those who were waiting to audition?
No, because I had recently been playing in Sicily and had come back from Sicily, and so there was not many people that I knew. Within people looking for a gig, basically.
Okay, what band was it in Sicily?
Mccoy the Primitives. It was an English band that went out in the 60s, and the cantare was Mal, and they had a hit and had a number one in Italy, a track called Yeah, and I went out there and I played out there for about a year and a half and lived in Sicily for a year and a half with them.
Okay, so back to the audition with Maiden. What was the lineup of the band once you became part of Maiden?
It was a guitar, bass, drums, and they were at the same time advertising for a keyboard as well as a drummer.
But who are they, the members? Steve
Harris.
Of course,
and a guy called Terry Watram on guitar, and Dennis Wilcott on vocals, and then I joined alongside Tony Moore on keyboards.
Right, and do you remember what songs you used to practice back then at the time you were with the band?
Yes, mostly songs that went on to were included on the first 2 albums with Paul Diallo.
And then what was your feeling when hearing that first album of Maiden? What was your reaction? Do you remember?
My reaction was, well, I didn't really have a reaction to that, and I'm being totally honest. And the reason for that was because by then I was with Samson, and we had toured, and Iron Maiden had been our support band on the heavy metal crusade. So I was far more focused and concentrated on the Samson material, of which I was involved in. But obviously, listening to the first Iron Maiden album, it was I had a large amount of recognition of it because I had played on those tracks in rehearsal.
Yeah, I'll come to Samson in a moment, in fact. Okay. But just one last question about Iron Maiden. Do you, when you slowly watched the band achieve the global success that they are now, did you ever feel bitter at not being part of that?
No, you can't feel bitter. I mean, when I was with the band, it was work in progress, and it was in its infancy, and bit by bit, the band, and at that time, because of what was the new wave of British heavy metal, all the bands at that time were trying to get that major record deal, and with Samson, unfortunately, we came very, very close to it several occasions, but we never actually quite made it, whereas the likes of Iron Maiden and Def Leppard actually got those large deals and were able to sort of progress from there on in.
Okay, and yet Samson gave you more success than Iron Maiden. How did you get to know Paul Samson?
Well, as a teenager, when I came back from Sicily, I got a job behind a bar serving drinks behind this bar in a place in southeast London. And Paul Samson was a regular visitor there, and we'd always just chatted and, just basically passed the time of day talking about music and what have you. And then skip forward about a year later, I saw the advert for a drummer for Samson. And as I walked into the rehearsal studio, I looked at him and he looked at me, and we both went, "Oh my God, it's you!" And I did the did the audition with Chris Aylmer, the bass player.
Yeah.
I was asked to come back and attend a second because they'd whittled it down to 3 drummers. And when I got back for the second time, Chris Aylmer wasn't there, and the bass was being played by John Mccoy from Gillen.
Indeed, yeah.
And we went through a couple of the songs, and within no time at all, that weekend, I think I joined on a Wednesday or Thursday, we went out and did 3 back-to-back gigs at the weekend, and then immediately after that, we went straight into the studio to start recording the first album, Survivors.
I'm guessing it was your first recording experience, is that right?
No, because we recorded with the Primitives in Italy. We did quite a few recordings, but most of them were in Italian. And so, yes, I was used to recording because obviously every band that I ever played for, I would always want to put the material down on tape so that you can take it away and review it and look at it and see what you can change. And so, no, it wasn't my first recording, not my first experience of being in a recording studio, but John Mccoy produced it, and it was my first experience of learning all the little different tricks that you can do in production in the studio. My favourite, a lot of favourite artists that I have are really good to production bands. I like Brian Eno a hell of a lot because of what he does in the studio, especially with the early Roxy Music stuff, and that sort of thing. I love the idea that the technology, no matter how good or in those days primitive, you were still able to really go in and have fun and be able to do something and create.
Okay, and at what point did the Thunderstick alter ego of yours come into existence? How did that happen? Your must.
Yeah, it's a shame that you haven't got your video working because I'm sitting here wearing it at the moment.
Oh, okay. Yeah, pity.
If you believe that, you'll believe anything. No, what it came about was that in those days, because there was not really any video, or certainly no social media or DVDs or anything like that, most advertising of bands would be a poster. So you would get that poster in various magazines, and the poster would be the guitarist strutting his stuff at the front of the stage and the singer really going for it. And then in the background you would see somebody's head and a row of cymbals, and that was the drummer. All right, there were different drummers that were the exception to the rule, such as people like Keith Moon, of course, and John Bonham, and Ian Pace. They were able to sort of create within the band, But most drummers at that time were faceless, so I thought I would take it one step further and create a faceless drummer. So that's exactly what I did. I then became Thunderstick as opposed to using my real name, and then took it on one step further and played within a cage.
Yeah, and this was also taken into your live shows of Samson, right?
That's correct, yes.
I'd like to ask you about the Biceps of Steel video. What was the idea behind this particular 2-song video?
Okay, well, you see, around the time that Iron Maiden signed to EMI, we were looking for a major deal, being Samson, and EMI were interested, and we thought that we had managed to secure a major deal, but it really wasn't the case. What happened was that EMI told the management that, you know, they would like to do this, that and the other, and we thought that the album was definitely on the cards, but instead of that, they put out a single which never got released. It was pressed about 1,000 copies of it, and it was Hard Times, and it never got released. And from that, we had a record label called Gem, who were a subsidiary company of RCA. They said, look, we have this film company called GTO Films. Would you be interested if we signed you as opposed to EMI? We would definitely put the album out. We would do a short film to promote the band, etc. So that's how it came about. The story behind it was the fact that it was because of the name of the band, Samson. Most people know the story that Samson got all his hair cut off.
Yeah.
And lost all his strength. So in our little short film, I played the roadie who was Samson, and you know, I was roadieing for the band Samson, and all the close-ups was me wearing the mask in the cage and doing the drum rolls, and then when they wanted the two of us in focus at the same time, in other words, me playing the roadie, and right in the background there we have the band, including Thunderstick, they had somebody fill in, and he put the mask on and pretended to play, whilst I sort of took the lead role, if you like. And it was just purely that. It was the roadie who had superhuman strength when he started, and he was seduced by a woman who cut all his hair off and he lost all his strength.
Yeah, and at that time videos weren't that common as they are today, right? So
very much, it was just in its infancy, video. It was,
yeah.
In actual fact, instead of shooting it on video, they did shoot it on real film. And there was I think it was about a 3 or 4 camera shoot. And the producer, stroke director, was a guy called Julian Temple,
who went on to make many films inspired by music,
including the Rolling Stones, and the Sex Pistols, etc. Yeah.
So the video he did with Samson was one of his first attempts, I think, of indirect.
That's right, yeah. And it went on general release in cinemas as a short opening film accompanying, there was a film called Breaking Glass.
Okay.
And that was the main film, but it was the same label, same film company, GTO, and we went out as an opener for that.
Around 1978, I believe, when you had joined Samson, basically Samson and Maiden traded drummers, because Clive Burr, who used to play with Samson, joined Maiden, and you, who used to play with Maiden, joined Samson. I was wondering if you and Clive ever shared your experiences after that.
Several times.
What did you say to each other?
Well, it was really funny because we used to have a little standing joke that if we went to each other's gigs, and I went to an Iron Maiden gig and Clive came to a Samson gig, whoever's gig it was, the other person would go on dressing room duty and would stop anybody from going backstage if they weren't wanted backstage.
Okay.
So we used to do that at each other's gigs. So I would stand on the door and be on dressing room duty for Iron Maiden gigs, and he for Samson gigs.
and And at that time, was he already, his health already showing signs of?
No, not at all. Not at all. I think it came as a big surprise to a lot of people when it was actually revealed that he was ill.
Yes, and of course, in Samson, you also played alongside Bruce Dickinson. I wonder, what do you know about Bruce Dickinson that some people might find surprising?
Okay, well, Bruce, the way it came about that we found Bruce was Paul Samson and I would often go out socially. We wouldn't just play together in the band. We'd go out socially a lot. We were out one night in a pub in a place called Gravesend, which is...
I know where it is, yeah.
Okay, south of the country. And we went to this pub for a drink, and they had a band on, a pub band, and it was actually Bruce with his band called The Shots. And they played the gig, and unfortunately for them, the gentlemen's toilets were right behind what they had used as a stage. There was no stage, it was just set up on the floor. And they were performing in front of the toilet, and Bruce kept nipping out into the toilet so that he could have a change of clothing, that he was, going through different costume changes. And his little thing within the set was that he would generally poke fun at the audience, and he did that with me, and thought it was highly amusing. He went back out into the toilet to get into his next costume or whatever it was, and both Paul and I, who were interested in as much as that we thought his voice was really good and strong, we went out to talk to him, and he actually thought, after we'd spoken to him, he actually thought that because he'd been poking fun at us, that we both got in there to duff him up, beat him up. And anyway, we got talking with him, and he said, well, I can't join the band at the moment because I'm 3/4 of the way through my history degree, and it's soon to finish. So what happened was that he would then come up and do encores with us and sing with us. And then eventually, after he got his history degree, he joined the band. He had a lot of material. We had lots and lots of material. So we joined forces, and the result was then Head On.
The last tour Bruce Dickinson did with Samson was when you were touring with Maiden, right?
Yeah, it was when we put, excuse me, our management, Samson management, put together a thing called the Heavy Metal Crusade. And I was the one that suggested Iron Maiden because I knew that they were continuing and they were a good band. And so they joined us, and as well as another band called Angel Witch.
Yeah.
And we went out on tour and did the Heavy Metal Crusade. And there was a big write-up in a magazine called Sounds, where I had the front cover wearing the mask, and in the middle 2 pages was a 2-page extravaganza about the gig that the guy had gone along to have a look at. This was when the terminology new wave of British heavy metal was actually used for the very first time, and that was because up until then punk had been really quite prevalent in the UK. Record labels were signing punk bands, promoters were putting punk bands on, and if you were a hard rock stroke heavy metal band, you didn't get a look in. And so there was this sudden upsurge of all these different bands, and we being one of them, Iron Maiden being another. And so obviously Iron Maiden were used to seeing Bruce on stage every night, much the same as I was used to seeing Iron Maiden on stage every night. So yes, I think that by the time that I left was when Samson was to continue on with another drummer, but Bruce dropped a bombshell when they were just about to sign a large record deal, and he said, sorry, I'm off to join Iron Maiden, and that was that.
And what was your reaction to that? How did you feel?
Well, I didn't, because I'd gone by then. I'd left before Bruce, and I was, by that time, I joined a guy called Bernie Tormé for a little while, Electric Gypsies, and then I went on to form Thunderstick, the band. And yes, I just sort of, Paul and I kept in contact because we were friends. We weren't just musicians that played together, we were friends. So, yes, it was a bit strange that that Samson had tried so hard to get that major deal, and they looked as though they were just about got it, and then Bruce announced that he was leaving and joining Maiden.
Of course, Bernie Tormejo had also replaced Randy Rhoads after Randy passed away with Ozzy, right?
That's correct, yes.
Is there any recording of yourself when you were playing with Bernie Tormejo?
Yes, I think so. We didn't actually go into a studio to record, but we did a radio session for a London-based radio company or radio. I think it was called Capital Radio, and we did a session on that, a rock session. I should imagine Bernie may have the tapes, or I've never heard it. But we did it, so yes.
Okay, and I believe you also returned to play with Samson for a while, is that right?
Yes, I mean, we would come and go, and when it was, there was a lot of interest being shown in the new wave of British heavy metal and reunions of bands within that, and we did Japan, we did Wacken Festival, we wrote new material, and it was a time that we sent a lot of new material to Bruce, because he, by that time, was a solo artist. He'd left Maiden.
Okay.
And it looked as though he would be rejoining Samson. And we started talking and discussing it, and the material was getting sent backwards and forwards, and then suddenly we saw in the press that he'd rejoined Iron Maiden.
Okay, and what was it like playing in festivals like Wacken? That must have been quite an experience for you.
Yeah, I mean, because with a festival like that, you are unable to have a sound check, so you have to go straight on stage and do it. And I remember punching the bass drum for the first time, and PA, the speakers on stage,
the monitors.
The monitors nearly took my head off. It was lovely. It was really good.
Okay, and then sadly, of course, in 2002, Paul passed away, and Chris Aimler also passed away 5 years after that. And how did you feel about losing two bandmates in such a short space of time?
Very upset. I mean, they weren't just bandmates; they were mates, as it were. They were friends. We were close friends. Paul and I would often talk on the phone, and we would be around each other's houses, listening to various types of music and stuff like that. And it was terrible. It really was. I miss him still today, because we had a humour very much in common with each other. You know, we had the same sort of sense of humour.
You're talking about Paul now, right?
Sorry?
You're talking about Paul now.
Yes, Paul, yeah. And there's never been anybody in my life to replace that. It's a shame. It's terrible that he's not here at the moment.
Yes, indeed. And then you were mentioning those recordings that were going back and forth with Bruce, and eventually, I believe John Mccoy completed that album, and it became Samson's last album. I don't know what your views are on that album.
It was originally going to be a Samson reunion album, and a lot of tracks on that album were joint songwriting tracks, and it was going to be the reunion now. That was the material that some of which, not all of it, but some of which, that material had made up the new material that we'd been putting together. And it was only fair that after Paul died, and he hadn't finished mixing those tracks, that it was only fitting that John Mccoy did that, and as opposed to putting it out as a band album, it went out as a Paul Samson album, P.S. It was also obviously the name of the album, P.S., was also very relevant.
Of course.
It's like unfinished business.
Yeah, definitely, and his initials, of course.
Yeah.
Let's talk about your band Thunderstick. You had already started the first incarnation of the band after you left Samson in the early 1980s. Why do you think that band didn't take off at the time? What was going on with your band in the 80s?
I think what people were expecting was to be another kind of Samson Mark II, and just called it Thunderstick, and that wasn't the case, because Samson there was one kind of music that Samson played. It was the way we made the music and the way we performed it, and it was Samson music. I think a lot of people were expecting that to be reincarnated in the band that I put together, and it really wasn't. I kind of went into hard rock, and as opposed to what they call heavy metal. I never thought that Samson were ever heavy metal anyway.
Mm-hmm.
They were a hard rock band. They were never heavy metal.
Yeah.
And so I put a female vocalist at the front, and at that time that was particularly risky, because not many people were doing that, putting a female. Okay, we had Doro Pesh and people like that.
Warlock.
And Warlock, yeah. But I put a female vocalist at the front, and we were very theatrical, and I don't know, it's strange. How can you tell as to why a band never catches on? It's just one of those things. But we started getting a following. We were very much a sort of a band that were never going to hit really big time. It was an expensive band to put together because of the theatrics, and yet again, we never managed to secure that major record deal, which always makes the it makes the journey a lot more tolerable.
Yeah.
And we never got it. So we were always constantly looking for investors and people to put money into it, etc.
And now you're at work on a brand new Thunderstick album. Can you tell me more about that? I mean, are these songs you had written back in the 80s, or are they brand new songs, etc.?
Okay, well, they are a mixture of both. I have material that both Jody actually had passed on last year, and Jody and I were, back in the 80s, we were an item. We were married, man and wife. Our marriage fell apart. She went back to the States, and the songs that we had written together were just sort of put to one side. And we put one album out and one EP back in the day, and then in 2011 there was a record label that approached me and said, have you ever thought about remastering the album that you did back in 85? And because of now the technology exists that you're able to clean it all up and make
it's more accessible.
Yeah, and so I did that. I remastered all the material, and we put it out as an album called Echoes from the Analog Asylum, and that was that. And I had no intention of actually putting anything else out as Thunderstick. I've been playing with various people and doing bits and pieces, underneath the radar, as it were, without a high kind of, there's no kind of me being out there in the great scheme of things. It was not a high profile. I was working as a musician, but working as a musician for myself. And then suddenly, because of the interest this created, I had a few more people saying, look, have you got any more material? We should do a new album. And so a lot of people bullied me and coaxed me
and threatened you.
And told me to do it. So here I am, and I start recording the last week in this month. And so it's not all new material. Some of the material is Jody and I had written back in the day, and I would really dearly like to get that recorded, just as a little tribute to her. And the rest of the material is brand new.
And who will be who are the musicians who will be playing with you in this forthcoming album?
Ex-members of Thunderstick, which is great. I'm really looking forward to working with those guys again, and some other people that at this moment I can't name them, in the hope that we will be putting it together. But I start doing the bass and drum tracks. Start the 26th of this month.
Will John Mccoy be playing with you? Hopefully.
That's a leading question. I can't answer that at the moment.
Well, if John hears this interview, I'll encourage him to get involved.
Yeah, sure. Of course. If he hears this interview, let me just say hi, John. Hope you're all right.
Okay, fingers crossed. Okay, and do you plan to play live once this album is eventually comes out?
Yes. I'm funny enough. You've already mentioned Clive Burr. On the 26th of May, one day before Iron Maiden play London, we are putting together a gig in benefit of multiple sclerosis, which was the disease Clive had and subsequently died, not from multiple sclerosis, but due to complications.
Exactly.
The fact of what he had. We're doing that, and the five ex-members of Iron Maiden are going to be performing all with their own bands. You have Dennis Wilcock and Terry Watpram in their band V1. I believe Dougie Samson's going to play in his band, and I'm headlining it. Which is great. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, it sounds really interesting. Remind me again where and when?
Okay, it's the 26th of May, the day before Maiden play London. And it is in a place called The Lounge, and it's in North London, Archway. That's all I know about it. Other than that, I don't know anything else about it. But I'm sure online there'll be various bits and pieces of information that anybody can pick up on.
Great. I've come to the end of this interview. I just have one more question for you, Barry or Thunderstick.
Okay.
What album would you want, or what would you want your music legacy to be?
What would be my legacy? Just that's hard. Each musician has so many different facets to make it up, that musician. I would want people to say, he was a good drummer. He was a really, really good drummer. And I've never been a technical drummer. I've never been someone that could sit down and do rudiments. I play from the heart. Mm-hmm. And I really do. I really appreciate people playing rudiments and having that technical ability, because they amaze me. I sit there and watch them and go, wow, I wish I could do some of that. But I've been self-taught. I've always played from my heart, and the legacy I would leave would be, I hope people thought that I was a good drummer, and the material that I've done, as well as that, my writing ability as a musician. I've never been just a drummer. I've always considered myself to be a musician first and drummer second. And that's it. And just be true to your art. Simple as that.
Fantastic. Thunderstick or Barry Purkis, it was a pleasure speaking with you. Honestly, best wishes for your forthcoming album.
Thank you very much. And you too. It's been great talking to you.
Likewise. Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye.